I listened to it all, and I said, Andrew, is this something I done to get? Is this about Queen Victoria? She's the main cat, and Disraeli and Gladstone are other cats, and then there are poor cats. Am I missing this? And he took a terrible, painful long pause and said, Hall, it's about cats, and we never discussed it again. In 2012, New York Times food critic Pete Wells published a review of Food Network personality and human can of Bud Light Lime, Guy Fieri's massive Times Square restaurant, Guy Fieri's American Kitchen and Bar, fittingly located right across the street from the Majestic Theater, which at the time had hosted Phantom of the Opera on Broadway for nearly 25 years. And while some 8 years later we've come full circle to where we all decided that Guy Fieri is both prime meme fodder and also good now. 2012 was a different time, and Wells' review pulled no punches. Guy Fieri, have you eaten at your new restaurant in Times Square? Did panic grip your soul as you stared into the whirling hypno wheel of the menu where adjectives and nouns spin a crazy vortex, when you saw the burger described as Guy Spetlafrida custom blend all-natural Creekstone Farm black Angus beef patty, will top lettuce, tomato, onion, and pickle, super melted cheese, and a slathering of donkey sauce on garlic buttered bridge? Did your mind touch the void for a menu? This is view to as bow who I'm so sorry bow you who's you lose you I will well I wish you why will oh you why Hey, did you try that blue drink? The one that glows like nuclear waste, the watermelon margarita. Any idea why it tastes like some combination of radiator fluid and formaldehyde? What is going on at this new restaurant of yours, really? And in a way that food reviews seldom do, Wells' piece blew up and went viral, with everyone sharing it to their Facebook and Twitter timelines, cheering and celebrating the epic panache of Guy Fieri, that sun-drenched, frosted-tipped buffoon, by one of the most widely circulated newspapers in the world. And while rubbernecking trash fires has been a time-honored tradition as long as civilization has been a thing, the commodification of our need to see trash being eviscerated by the critic intelligentsia has become an ever-evolving industry. One can, after all, easily elevate their own brand with a well-timed takedown. There's snow mist in the galaxy. Ding. That's not Earth. Fake. Ding. And with Tom Hooper's 2019 train wreck adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical of the same name, there was blood in the water. Watching cats is like stumbling upon an unholy and hit you for unknown genre of porn. Every time these horny fur demons tango a milk bowl and start moaning, I was certain the FBI would raid the theater. It's loud to report that Cats is everything you'd hoped for and more. A mesmerizingly ugly fiasco that makes you feel like your brain is being eaten by a parasite, a viewing experience so stressful that it honestly brought on a migraine. Can you make a movie so bad that the Academy takes back your Best Director Oscar? Asking for Tom Hooper. By the time I left the theater, I wasn't even sure what a real cat looked like anymore. To assess cats as good or bad feels like the entirely wrong axis on which to see it. It is, with all affection, a monstrosity. I am not a cat person. Second off, after watching this frankly mortifying film adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats, I'm not altogether sure I am a movie person anymore either. Finally, a whole new generation can discover that Cats the musical is 2 hours of human feline hybrids without genitals, having no touch sex, and begging for death via song. Cats is the worst thing to happen to cats since dogs. Cats is pure nightmare fuel. The rejects from the island of Dr. Murrow putting on a show is bad enough, but add to that more crotch shots than a Michael Bay movie and every imaginable pun, and that still want to prepare you for the hellscape that is children's faces kite onto mice. For the most part, Cats is both a horror and an endurance test. A dispatch from some neon-drenched netherworld where the ghastly is inextricable from the tedious. I felt the light inside me slowly fading. Oh God, my eyes! Are you blind when you reborn? Can you see in the dark? I was one of the very first people to see Cats, the movie, the musical, if Tom Hooper is to be believed, some 24 hours after the film was even finished. This was not because I'm the world's biggest Cats stan or because I'm just that important. It was because I cajoled my friend, who got invited to a critic screening, to let me be her +1. See, after weeks of reveling in the pure unintentional Salvadorian madness that was the trailer, I was keen to be one of the first. I got me complimentary cat ears. They gave us cats temporary tattoos and cats champagne, presumably to help black out what we were about to see, and we settled in for the ride of a lifetime. There were 2 types of people at this screening: people who were familiar with Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats, and people who until now had lived in blissful ignorance. I was, in fact, sandwiched right between 2 of these people. To my left sat Angie Hahn, critic for Mashable.com and who knew all about cats, and to my right Emily van der Werf, critic at large for Vox.com and the person I cajoled into taking me, and who, like me, was familiar with cats. Emily spent more or less the whole film making this face, and Andrew spent the whole film making this face. Both of them deeply enjoyed the experience, for the record. Maybe not the film itself, but definitely the experience. For people who had seen Cats before, the question seemed to be, I'm saying a cat is not a dog. Is this it? Is this what Cats is? Is this what Cats has been the whole time? And on that day, I was like, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much Cats. What did you expect? And say, a cat is not a dog. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know I spent most of my December and January obsessed with the Cats movie, which was every bit as much of a train wreck as I had hoped. And why? Even now, I honestly could not tell you. But the more time I spent on Cats and thinking about this movie, the more I had to actually confront these questions. Not just the question of why am I so fixated on this unquestionable disaster, but why is Cats? How did this become a thing? Because that the movie and the stage musical exist at all, let alone that the musical was as popular as it was, is somewhat baffling. I got so fixated on this that I started a podcast about it, where I explain musicals to my friend who hates musicals. Information in the description. And, of course, our pilot episode was about cats. But even there, where I attempt to explain that which is Cats, I kind of fail because that question of why came up a few times. So it still leads to the real question. which is, who likes cats? I would argue it's kids. I say I don't know. Like I don't know who cats is for because I don't know anyone who's right or d for cats. I'm literally looking at a person who's right or d for cats. No, I'm not. You can deny it all you want. But I don't think that in that episode I answered that why question satisfactorily. And part of that is, I think, the mistake of conflating the why for the stage musical, which is almost 40 years old, kind of like man the why for the movie. I realize now that those two why God whys have very different answers. The first time I saw the film, I was like, well, what did you expect? This is Cats. But I'm going to have to walk back this assessment. If we err asking why this happened, and wholly conflating this with this, then, my jellical friends, we err asking the wrong questions. Cats the Musical is based on a collection of poems entitled Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats, written by T.S. Eliot and published in 1939. As the poems were originally written for Eliot's young godchildren, the nature of them skews light and comedic, short and whimsical. Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber not only grew up with this book of poetry, he also just loves cats. How? It's about cats. Just big fan of cats. Nothing deep, nothing weird, man just likes him a cat. But Lloyd Webber didn't toe the idea of turning practical cats into a show until the late 1970s. A friend had asked him if he'd be interested in composing music set to poetry. And one day, while Evita was in rehearsals, he thought of that book that his mother had read to him as a child. My mother used to read them to me, and I always loved them, and I had them myself, and I kept them for years. And I always thought that there was something about them that was very musical, I guess. But it wasn't until he had a long, liquid lunch with producer Cameron Mackintosh in 1980, however, that Cats the Stage Musical became its own moving engine. But a large, dance-centric show was a daring move for musical theatre at the time. Cameron was already friends with acclaimed choreographer Gillian Lynne, who would ultimately choreograph the show. The man was wonderful when he made love to me, but I hated him. But getting the rights from T.S. Eliot's widow, or finding a director, even. Everybody thought we were mad to do a show about cats. Everybody. But it turned out that T.S. Eliot's widow was not as hard a sell as they feared. After years of dodging requests to make Old Possum's book into an animated film from companies like Disney, she was afraid that Old Possum would turn out like Winnie the Pooh or something. Sir Horny Lloyd Webber came to her with a more novel, adult approach. So I plucked up me courage, and I said to Valerie, I said, what would, if I wanted them to be a bit like Hot Gossip? She said, Tom would have liked that. If you re not familiar with Hot Gossip, here was their big hit at the time. I lost my heart to a Starship Trooper. I lost my heart. I lost my heart. Hall Prince was not available to direct this show, however. Hull, It's About Cats. And after being passed over by multiple stage directors, Lloyd Webber and Mackintosh settled on Royal Shakespeare Company director Trevor Nunn. But right off the bat, Lloyd Webber kept running into problems of people not getting it. All cats are jellicles, you see. This is made clear in one of the unpublished poems. Yes, but all the other cats are jellicles as well. All cats are jellicle cats, fundamentally. You see, dogs are polycle dogs, and cats are jellicle cats. Cats is more like a review than a traditional plot-driven musical in its format, which isn't a surprise given that it's based on a collection of poems without much connective tissue except for the whole cat thing. But it was director Trevor Nunn who suggested giving an emotional through-line to the show that would give it some semblance of a story. The plot, well, if it can be said to have one, is similar to Broadway's previous longest-running show, 1975's A Chorus Line, as characters take turns singing to win a contest. And the sympathy vote goes to the one-busted old lady, long in the tooth and yearning for another chance. In Cats, Grizabella, the glamour stinky Sally Bow Whiskers. Along with her are a bunch of other feline hopefuls, sporting names like Monkestrep, the Rum-Tum Tugger, Skimbleshanks, the Railway Cat, Ginny Annie Dots, the Gumby Cat, Asparagus, the Theatre Cat, Ain't It Chief, the Cancelled Cat, Nala the Girlboss Cat, Fury, the Flavortown Cat, and so on. And the success of Cats was by no means a given. The ambitious nature of the musical meet that few theatres were willing to risk hosting it, and the one they eventually did secure, the New London Theatre, saw a massive overhaul of the theatre itself just for this production. Funding was also coming up short, and Lloyd Webber had to take out a second mortgage on his home just to complete it. So Cats was, weirdly enough, an underdog passion project that Lloyd Webber risked everything for. And all of this was before the show could be considered anything remotely close to done. Why? The writing process was a work in progress throughout previews right until opening, in no small part because figuring out the connective tissue between a bunch of poems wasn't exactly a priority for Lloyd Webber, who just wanted a bunch of people in Lycra toasting about being cats. But a major issue was the lack of an emotional linchpin, the showstopper, that emotional ballad that is the keystone of every musical. Cats didn't really have one, nor did it have a character toasting it, and none of Eliot's whimsical poems really lent themselves to that sort of ballad. Said character came in the form of one of Eliot's unpublished poems, Grizabella the Glamour Cat, a poem about a sad has-been cat that Eliot cut from his collection because, given that the collection was for children, he considered it too sad. So Grizabella the Glamour Cat became the song that served as the character's entrance. But what would she sing? As a composer, Lloyd Webber would sometimes write a song, but not really have a home for it in whatever show he was working on. The song that would become memory, the melody for it at least, he had written several years earlier, and was basically saving it for just such an occasion. So there was the melody, but there weren't really any cat poems that fit it. So the lyrics are inspired by, rather than directly lifted from, an Eliot poem that was not part of Old Possum, Rhapsody on a Windy Night. I say inspired by because the lyrics went through a lot of versions, one of which from Lloyd Webber's former lyricist and writing partner, Tim Rice, who had co-written with him Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jesus Christ Superstar, and Evita. Now, by this point, Lloyd Webber and Rice had well and truly fallen out, even though neither of them have ever really publicly explained why, but Lloyd Webber asked him to do a pass on it. Rice was like, fine, he did, and then he was like, actually don't use me lyrics, but then they used his lyrics during previews, and he got really mad, and he threatened to sue. It was a whole thing. I did write a lyric for memory, and it went into the show for a couple of nights in previews, and then it was taken out and given to a lyricist chosen by the director. Eventually, it was None who found the most agreeable interpretation of the poem, and lo, Cats has its signature song, completed sometime during previews. And despite all of those low expectations, despite the no plot, despite the weirdness, despite the lycra, despite the hair, despite everything, by 1981, Cats had opened in London and soon swept the Olivier Awards, coming to Broadway some 18 months later, and there swept the Tonys, including Best Musical. But despite the show's success, critics were not super enamored with Cats, ripping apart the gossamer thin plot, the weird mood, the focus on dance, which according to theatre professor Alison Clamore, musical theatre scholars tend to be biased against. Broadway legend Elaine Stritch just walked out, said Stritch later. But in spite of all of its strange, gaudy borderline Showtime after midnight drapings and utterly befuddling story, Cats managed to amass its own army of stay-at-home moms, lonely 12-year-olds, and perverts that critics could never hope to dissuade. It's for everybody. It's for kids. It's for adults. I've seen it about 9 times now, and every time it's better than last year. I enjoyed it more tonight than I did 18 years ago when it first came out. It's so very exciting. All different things are happening, It's so very emotional. To quote a Guardian article from last winter, Cats is the best show I ever saw. Gorgeous, simply gorgeous. Cats was also the original blockbuster mega musical. On the business side, everything that was wrong with Cats worked to its benefit. No stars meet cast changes were not a problem. Thin story meet those lucrative foreign tourists don't miss anything. No money quote from the Times Review. Well, we don't need it. We've got this amazing poster that would only be harmed by critic quotes. Minimalism, baby. The actors also traditionally interact with the audience, which, while not much fun for Elaine Stritch, helps most theatregoers lose themselves in the shamelessness of it all. Jellicles come to the Jellicle Bowl. Nostalgia is also a factor. While Cats fans do come in all ages, the superfans tend to be age 40+ and remember the original West End and Broadway versions. Another part of the show's appeal is that there are so many characters for audiences to relate to. And for most fans of the show, the fact that it is so weird, so removed from reality is not a bug, but a feature. In his New York Times review of Cats, Frank Rich wrote that despite its flaws, the reason people will hunger to see Cats is that it's some musical that transports the audience into a complete fantasy world that could only exist in theater. Rich added some 40 years later, and once again, we circle back to that question of, but why? Though, what's a Jellicle cat? What's a Jellicle cat? Steven Spielberg and Amblin Entertainment reached out to work with Andrew Lloyd Webber on an animated version in 1989. Spielberg's vision was to be set in a dark, World War II-era London and to be somewhat Brechtian in tone, which okay. The concept art that has been released is actually pretty cool, and as is the case with most musicals, an animated adaptation makes way more sense than the Nietzschean horror that we eventually got. But ultimately, between production delays, squabbles about the screenplay, and how to create an actual plot, and the failure of Amblin's other animated films like An American Tail, Fievel Goes West, We Read Back, A Dinosaur Story, and Balto, A studio shut down in 1997 and ended any hope of the animated film coming to fruition. A multi-camera version of the stage show was filmed and released in 1998, shortening the musical and adding new elements like force lightning. So this should be good enough. We have this. We don't need a live-action movie and a fall of the musicals to adapt. It makes the most sense that Cats had evaded adaptation for so long, despite its popularity. Universal bought the film rights to Cats sometime after the Amblin production folded, and it kind of existed in that development hell limbo ever since. Lloyd Webber kind of hinted at something being in the works as early as 2013, but we didn't see movement until about 3 years later. So what happened in that time? Well, Greatest Showman came along and made $500 million worldwide. Obviously, I'm not Mr. Universal, but we can surmise that Mr. Universal saw the long in development Cats project and thought, hey, let's give that the go-ahead, and then we too can make $500 million. And while we read there, let's attach to it the last guy who won a bunch of Oscars for a musical. That's the ticket. $500 million and Oscars. Everybody wins. So it does kind of feel like we're missing a step here, that a prestige musical adaptation equals Oscar bait de facto. For most of the early history of the Academy Awards, musicals were a major presence if for no other reason than in the early days of talkies. Musicals just made up a much larger proportion of films that got made. But as we covered in the episode about roadshows, the big studio musical was kind of on its way out in the 1960s in favor of more heady experimental cinema. But then we had a couple of big hits and, more importantly, big Oscar winners in the form of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. So that created a sort of boom and bust for the musical as an awards darling, but also for the movie and musical in general. After Hello Dolly was a critical and commercial failure, the Hollywood musical was kind of dead for a while. So after that you had movies like Cabaret, which, while unlike big studio musicals in most regard, did win a bunch of Oscars. But that was kind of the end of the era of musicals as Oscar darlings. You'd have your Greases, your Little Shops, but they were more like popcorn movies. They weren't awards bait. And musicals mostly moved into animation. Hell, the next musical after Cabaret and all that jazz in the 70s, both directed by Bob Fosse, to get nominated for Best Picture was Disney's Beauty and the Beast. So fast forward to 2001, where we are still firmly in the musicals equals popcorn movies mindset. Diamond's Era Girls, Best Friend. Moulin Rouge was not designed to be an Oscar movie. It was designed for Baz Luhrmann's Romeo plus Juliet, made a bunch of money, And he has a budget now, so let's just let him do whatever he wants. And Moulin Rouge is an even bigger hit than Romeo plus Juliet. Outside it may be raining, but in here it's entertaining. Now Moulin Rouge came out around the end of May, but like Greatest Showman, it had really good legs. Hey, and by the time awards season comes around, it's still in theaters, so Fox was like, hey, let's just go ahead and do a 4-year consideration campaign and boom, Best Picture nominee. Who would have ever thought? Everything's going so well. This sets the stage for the already in development Chicago, itself fueled by Harvey Weinstein's 4-year consideration campaigns of attrition, and not only does Chicago win Best Picture, but 5 other awards in 2003, the first musical to win Best Picture since Oliver in 1968. Now, 2 things here. One is that adaptations of Andrew Lloyd Webber's musicals have historically not yielded very good results, either commercially or with regard to awards. I mean, don't get me wrong. They tree. The most successful to date is the 1996 film adaptation of Evita, starring Madonna and Antonio Banderas, which, while not an Oscar darling, despite winning Best Original Song, it did win a bunch of Golden Globes, including Actress for Madonna and Best Motion Picture, Musical or Comedy. Then, of course, there's Phantom of the Opera, which was also released in the thick of awards season with high hopes. It did have a pretty aggressive 4-year consideration campaign, and it did yield a couple of Oscar nominations, including bewilderingly cinematography. And so, bewildered, I could say, I could do it. For more on why that is terrible, watch the video we made on why it is terrible. Second is that Cats is not structured like a Hollywood screenplay, even in relation to other Andrew Lloyd Webber shows, which do tend to have, like a plot. So right off the bat, even in comparison to projects like Phantom of the Opera or Evita, with Cats, they are starting at a huge disadvantage, which I suspect Mr. Universal knew for a long time, considering how long it took them to get Cats out of development hell. How do you give this thing the structure of a Hollywood movie while also keeping it recognizably Cats? I can't dance how he dances too. Let me see. It's easy. Well, apparently you don't. So it wasn't just the incredible, unexpected success of Greatest Showman. It was also who directed the film, and I am absolutely 100% positive that Tom Hooper would never have been attached to Cats if the song Memory was not Cats' biggest staple. Ignoring Universal, so aggressive for your consideration campaign for Les Miserables, a movie which proved that musicals can still be Oscar darlings even into the 2010s, most point to Anne Hathaway's rendition of I Dreamed a Dream as the thing that clinched her an Oscar win. So attaching Hooper to Cats was a no-brainer. Cats has the big Oscar-winning ballad. Les Mis has the big Oscar-winning ballad. It's some synergy. But Les Miserables was a harbinger of things to come, and for every truly bewildering decision that Hooper made in Cats, the warning signs were always there. When philosopher and media theorist Marshall McLuhan famously said, "The medium is the message," what did he mean by that? Simplistically, it's the idea that you can only receive an idea or a story through be that medium a poem, a novel, a film, a stage show, or even just the act of talking. It is not the idea or story itself that is being expressed, but a medium that is expressing it. Therefore, the medium should be the focus of study. According to theater scholar Linda Hutcheon, while no medium is inherently good at doing one thing and not another, each medium, like each genre, has different means of expression and so can aim at certain things better than others. So let's look at Les Miserables as a case study. You have Victor Hugo's novel Les Miserables. You have the Epps masterpiece miniseries starring Dominic West and David Oyelowo. And you have the Boblil and Schoenberg stage musicals. Three different mediums telling the same story, but owing to difference in medium, they tell them in very different ways that are designed, first and foremost, to fit their respective medium. So what can often happen when you have someone schooled in one medium who is suddenly having to figure out how to most effectively do another, that can lead to some dissonance. I think what I was trying to achieve was a combination of extreme realism so that the film would feel rooted in a visceral reality, but also allowing a certain heightening of reality. We saw this in Phantom of the Opera, directed by Joel Schumacher, where there's a lot of little things that just show him trying to make it less of a musical, like having them speak singing lines that don't make sense to sing, and then having Butler scream half his lines instead of singing them. And this, of course, works both ways. The producers. The 2005 film was directed by Susan Stroman, who also directed the Broadway stage show. The producer shows us what it's like when a stage director is uncomfortable working in the format of film. People who've never seen this show but did see the movie and adaptation, which is faithful to a fault because it's basically just the stage show, are like, that's it. That's the winningest, toniest show ever. But this film version is emblematic of how medium matters. So much that worked on the stage and led the producers to win the most Tonys of any musical by a single production in history just didn't translate to film. Quoting film scholar Robert Stamm, film clearly has resources that the stage can never have. The power of the close-up that gives the microdrama of the human countenance and the separate soundtracks of film that permit voice-overs, music, and the non-vocal to intermingle. Linda Hutcheon adds, and when we sit quiet and still, in the dark watching real live bodies on the stage, our kind of identification is different from when we sit in front of a screen and have the reality mediated for us by technology. So live theater naturally requires way more suspension of disbelief than film does. You are in the same room with these people. You have to applaud after every musical number. You can see the sets. You can see that the snow isn't real. The actors are probably pantomiming like half of a set that isn't there. But the medium of film works against that necessary suspension of disbelief. I'd rather just sing. Stop that, stop that. You're not going into a song while I'm here, and must be adjusted for with stillism. That's why musicals tend to work better as animated movies than live-action movies. An animated movie requires more suspension of disbelief because this isn't real. It's a drawing. Why was everyone singing? We've just got a song in our hearts. And therefore it fits more easily with the requirements of believing that these characters might suddenly just burst into song. How is it you all know the words? Did you rehearse? Yeah, every Thursday. Didn't you see the fleers? Of course, film directors do sometimes figure out ways to bridge this gap gracefully. Chicago springs to mind. It manages to work with the realism of the tone while incorporating the more theatrical framing, all while making it work within its own internal logic. And sometimes other movie musicals just don't care about how realistic or not the framing is, and they just don't bother caring about that. The Mamma Mia are a good example. They are not going for high art, and that's fine. But part of the tilt toward realism in film is because the Academy tends to reward a more realistic style. Not always, but overall. And for those of you out there who argue that Tom Hooper's style is actually kind of weird, strange angles and lots of dead space of exposed brick and wallpaper does not an unrealistically styled film make. Yes, Hooper does use a lot of unsettling visual language, and I'll get to that in a minute, but that doesn't mean that groundedness in realism is ultimately what he's going for. So in addition to a sort of stylistic discomfort with musicals in general, there's also incentive to make the visual style of the film more realistic. So his proclivity for dragging the medium of the musical kicking and screaming into the style of realism preferred by the Oscars, it was only a matter of time before he slipped into the uncanny valley. So the tactic with Les Mis' visual language was, in part, visual realism. But in addition to that, in order to make it feel more immediate and more realistic, Hooper also elected to use set sound, recording the actors as they sang, other than the more traditional way of doing it, by having the actors sing along to playback. Hooper went to very great lengths to make the performance feel more authentic. By recording it live, Tom is allowing us the spontaneity of normal film acting. And it was a great gimmick to sell to Academy voters. So the medium of musical theater, which in the case of Les Mis and Cats requires the cast to be singing the whole time, already requires a much higher degree of suspension of disbelief than film does. And not just realistic, actively at war with the big emotions of the music. You have extreme close-ups, constantly, for 3 hours on actors who are singing songs designed to play to cheap seats. Well, he did. Les Mis is bad, but it won some awards. So even though the main impact of that movie is in Le Chauvette memes, the formula, according to Universal, appears to be Tom Hooper plus beloved classic musical equals profit. So that's how we got here. Let's see what we got. I don't know what I expected, although I will attempt to find rationale, if not reason, in the film version of Cats. There are many bewildering choices that I can only attribute to Hooperian whimsy. From horny Judi Dench scissoring in delight after Gus the theater cat, to Jennifer Hudson spending most of her screen time in close-ups with her face covered in snot, Tom Cavity being played the way that he is. How do you manage to make Idris Elba unappealing? The aspect of the film that drew the most attention, positive and negative, after that first trailer was released was the uncanny valley-ness of it all, which all goes back to Hooper's attempts to draw this weird fantastical show back down to realism. Said Hooper in an interview for The Atlantic, "I wanted to keep it very grounded in the present moment. The thing I'm most proud of is that you feel grounded watching it. It's not that fantastical." Which it's Cats, dude. Blame has been laid upon the visual effects team, which, and nobody more than us understands the importance of good visual effects. Okay, let's talk about that for a moment. We've used digital fur technology to create the most perfect covering of fur. So Hooper wanted the film to be grounded and not that fantastical, and part of that was wanting his actors to be X amount of unencumbered, and also to shoot on practical sets. A weird scale. So he elected that they should not use mocap suits. Despite the fact that the suits they did wear looked plenty ridiculous, allegedly, this is hearsay. No one has gone on the record to say this. Hooper didn't want his actors distracted or encumbered. So no mocap suits. So all of the digital fur technology had to be done manually, which not only ballooned the post-production budget, it massively increased the labor required to finish it. But after the trailer hit, allegedly, again this is through me grapevine, Mr. Universal kind of panicked and slashed the funding going to post-production. And that, in part, is why you get these shots that look, well, kind of bad. And why you've got like these floating faces, and why there are some shots that aren't even finished. So when you hear horror stories of Thevek's Team 4 cats being underfunded and understaffed and overworked, allegedly, again no one has gone on the record to discuss this in any meaningful detail, because they don't want to lose their jobs, so this is all hearsay. This is the result. So the manually rotoscoped digital fur technology, the slashed budget, and Hooper's bizarre insistence on making changes up to the 11th hour, in part, leads us here. But even if it had gotten the time and money it needed, could this have worked visually? Would this have worked for audiences? Probably not. Hooper's dedication to making the movie feel grounded backfired horribly, no matter how much time Thevek's team had. These decisions were all rooted in trying to bridge that realism gap, so much so that certain elements are somehow both overthought and underthought at the same time. The film's approach to the titular animal is both way more literal and way more dense at the same time. One wonders if any of these people have ever even seen a cat. The film adds way more literal cat things that aren't even there in the show, like their ears move around. They crawl around on all fours and paw at each other. They lap at things and go meow, meow, meow. Gillian Lynn's choreography in the show is designed to be, like, more evocative of the idea of a cat, not a literal imitation of a cat. But here we are, not 10 minutes in, and we got a crotch-lickin' joke. I am a kitty. Meow. Meow. And all of this adds up to create a suspension of disbelief problem that isn't there in the musical. There are not humans in the musical, for instance, but here they are at the beginning of the film. We see them before we see any cats. Humans with their human bodies. Throwing away a kitten in a bag, who also has a human body. But as in Les Mis, Hooper just doesn't seem comfortable or particularly interested in the medium of the musical. The breaking of the fourth wall, for instance. Pretty common in musicals. Are you blind when you reborn? We see this in Les Mis in a scene where, in the musical, Gavroche is addressing the audience. How do you do? My name's Gavroche. These are me people. Here's me patch. But we can't have that, so in the movie, he addresses some random rich dude. How do you do? My name's Gavroche. These are me people. Here's me patch. But then in the following line, he addresses the audience anyway, so he addresses the audience in the lowest line. I think there was a time we killed faking. We tried to change the world too fast. Cats the musical breaks the fourth wall a lot more than Los Mis. The cats address the audience. They explain things to the audience. They interact with the audience physically. But we can't have that, so the movie gets around this by making Victoria the fish out of water. They explain the jellicle thing to her instead of the audience. So cutting this, do I actually see with me own very eyes? A man who's not heard of a jellicle cat sets up in the movie that fourth wall breaking is not a thing that is done here. Which you know what, fine. It's a movie, not a stage show. So then they hold to this change for the whole movie until the end when they have Dench address the camera for like 5 minutes straight. You've heard of several kinds of cats should need no interpreter. To understand the cats are very much like you. You've seen us both, our habits and our habitat. But how would you know first your memory and say a cat is not a dog? With cats, some say one rule is true. A cat will condescend to treat you as spoken to myself. I do not. Oh, for a cat will condescend to treat you dish of cream, or you might now and then. Will to you might you wish you to shoot, and no. Oh, you, try, may you never choose you never form you and and so in time you reach your aim and call him by his name. You reach, call him by his new nay. Movie adaptations also often change the arrangements of songs, which again fine. But in Cats, it just feels like Hooper did it because he was bored with them. The Rum Tum Tugger is one of the show's most high-energy numbers. And Derulo is actually a pretty good Rum Tum Tugger, except for that accent. So why, God, why, do we keep interrupting this number for Rebel Wilson's bad improve? In the very next scene, we interrupt Bustopher Jones for more Rebel Wilson shenanigans. Anyway, back to the song. Even during Skimbleshanks, the best number in the movie, A Mouse Yells Cats. Yep, that's what we re-watching. These things wouldn't be bad in and of themselves except that they don't add anything. It's like he's breaking up the musical numbers because he feels like they re too boring to stand on their own without something to break them up. The filmmakers' discomfort/disinterest with the material expands beyond just the medium of the musical and the show that they readapting itself. There's a patent rejection of anything non-heteronormative that's pretty over to anyone familiar with the stage musical. There is a lot of no homo in this movie. Romantical cats. Yea, God forbid that this guy be clocked as anything but the straightest manly man. It is often played in the musical that Mistopheles and Rum Tum Tugger have like a little something going on. The Rum Tum Tugger is a terrible bore, and we can't have that. So both of them get their no homo moments with Victoria. And Mistopheles gets it in the form of an all-out subplot. "I'm coming, Victoria." For all the other terrible cat puns and figures of speech that they added in the movie, I'm surprised they didn't add something about how Rum Tum Tugger loves da pussy. Romantical cats. Heterosexual cats. Heterosexual cats. Heterosexual cats. But if there's some scene that was always doomed to failure, or wild success depending on how you look at it, in anything live action or remotely realistic, it is the old Gumby cat sequence. I have a Gumby cat in mind. Her name is Jenny Anydots, wherein we hear about the titular Gumby cat, who lays around all day but at night teaches mice and other vermin to be upstanding members of society. The show accomplishes this with pantomime and props that are garbage from the junkyard that the cats are hanging out in, made to look like mice. There are multiple times in the show where the cats pantomime other animals and objects, like mice and dogs and roaches and cuckoo trains, by appropriating trash and turning it into props and such. Now they could have done that, but realism. So instead we get this. And it just keeps escalating and getting more and more horrifying. I can't even make commentary on this, so I'm not gonna. Except, why God, why did they give the mice children's faces? End of show. From the moment the trailer came out, my biggest question was how would they treat to give cats the shape of a Hollywood movie? I kind of deep down thought that they'd be smarter than that and just wouldn't bother. Like, they'd just let it keep its review-like qualities and have it be something kind of disjointed in the vein of Fantasia. But, whoa, did they fly wildly in the other direction, structuring the film with not one storyline from the musical on steroids, but two. The first is the enormously expanded part of Victoria, who's the protagonist now, and the emotional through line of Grisabella. A kitten with one brief dance solo in the show and no songs, the film gives her a little orphan abandoned in the world of the Jellicle Cat's narrative and takes this moment from the stage show and makes it the emotional through line of the movie. And I'm not saying this is handled gracefully in the show, but the movie tries to bolster it, and in doing so reveals the whole thing's weaknesses. It is distantly implied in the show, but stated outright in the movie. Why is Grisabella shunned by the other Jellicle cats? Then she went with Macavity. Macavity. Trying to add a little more logic to her story is not the most counterintuitive change in the world, but it does conflict with the other big change they made. Macavity. Mio. Macavity is like an obstacle that shows up towards the end of the show, like earlier some cats titter hearing about him and then later he shows up, he kidnaps old Deuteronomy, they immediately undo it and no one ever speaks of it again. And again, I'm not saying that this is good. It is charitably flimsy and Macavity is not really an antagonist, more of like a thing that happens. The tension of the story, if it can be said to have one, is just the question of who gets Toadie? Who gets Toadie the good death? Macavity in the show doesn't really care about this, but in the movie, I'm determined to win and I prefer me competition chained up. Whoa, it's his life's goal, that heavy-side layer. Why? Because Mio. And then, as if all this doesn't make you want to crawl out of your skin enough, the Napoleon of crime. Ha ha ha. Ah ha ha. Macavity. Macavity. Okay, so Macavity is the color of Idris Elba. Like, couldn't they just make him like a black cat or give him some stripes or something? I get that that could be problematic, but I don't think that the only alternative is to tumble head over ass into the uncanny valley by creating a cat that's just the color of human skin, which is itself kind of revealing. Like, imagining if one of the white actors had the same treatment. Just a cat the color of human skin. Would they have not caught this for the uncanny valley yikes that it is? He's a fiend. He likes shit. So Macavity's function in the movie is to remove the other cats from the competition, so he will be the jellicle choice. Despite the fact that he seems to be doing pretty well in this life, but whatever, he wants a new one. Macavity also serves the dual purpose of extracting your A-list celebrities who wanted to be in the movie but didn't want to be on set for more than 3 days. Macavity. So he ferrets his kidnapped celebrity cats, and also Skimbleshanks, to a boat which is manned by Ray Winstone, who is also a cat. And despite Macavity's magical powers, once they, I don't know, get bored of being tied up with a large chain, they escape easily, they get back just in time for memory, and then this happens. Anyway, so when Grisabella shows up at the end after the whole boat fight, it's like, well, the movie's already had its climax. We got old dude back. Why are we still here? Oh, right, the heavy side layer, the big climax. Making the Macavity subplot more of a focus leads to the resolution of that subplot getting way more screen time and involving way more characters. And it gives it the feel of the climax of the movie. But it's not. Memory is the climax. So the film builds in a new climax on the boat. Groltager make her walk the plank, while also keeping the original one. Jennifer Hudson is such a good singer that, like, I've never not watched this scene and gotten chills. Touch me. No, even leave me. Like, the arrangement and mixing are so good that even in the too rowdy screenings of Vcodec 2, the audience reverently listens to this bit. The plot was always paper-thin and flimsy, and it was that by design. But the film doesn't make the plot, such as it were, less flimsy. It just creates more of it, and more nonsense that the film obligates itself to explain, because we have committed ourselves to the style of realism and logic. But ultimately, if you want to ask the question of why Cats is the way it is, Cats is the story of hubris. Awards hubris. Celebrity hubris. Director hubris. Just good old-fashioned hubris. Like Les Mis, they wanted to have an all-star cast. But Cats is a terrible thing to adapt for big stars because, unlike Les Mis, it requires its cast to more or less be on stage the whole time, as opposed to Les Mis, where you can have Anne Hathaway for her 20 minutes of award-winning screen time, and then she's out for the rest of the movie. Cats is not designed like this. You either a cat that has a solo, or a cat that is in the ensemble, but you on stage more or less the whole time. Most of the songs don't have the cats singing about themselves, but another cat doing the singing. Gus is the cat at the theater door. The movie changes this by having them half the time just singing about themselves. Gus is the cat at the theater door. Gus the theater cat, Bustopher Jones, and especially the old Gumby cat come to mind as songs that were changed to give their stars more screen time. Don to get cocky, because they certainly were not changed because the arrangement was better. And whoa, do they fuck up the old Gumby cat by giving this song they give away when the deeds, hustle, and bustle is done, then the Gumby cat's work is but honey begun. To Rebel Wilson, who is not only not a great singer, who is non terrible singer, great so will so and no, no, I'm not. I'm not When the deeds, hustle, and bustle is done, then the Gumby Cat's work. It also nixes a three-part harmony. Because if you want Rebel Wilson in this movie for 20 minutes, she gots to get her a solo. But or in the case of McCavity, they take a duet and make it a solo, because Taylor Swift is not sharing the stage, my friends. So what do we do with a bunch of celebrities that want solos and want to be in the movie? Because it's got the awards the guy attached to it, see. So it's gonna win awards. But they don't wanna, be on set for more than like 3 days. Corden's got his talk show to work around. Taylor Swift on tour. You know what? We can't be bothered by being on set for more than 3 days. Well, how about McCavity kidnaps the A-listers? Ineffable. This not only solves our problem of not really having a threat or tension, it also means that we have a real solid good reason for these people not being in the background when they are not the center of attention. So not only do we now have a lazy reason to get our A-listers who don't want to be in the background out of the movie, we also made the movie worse. McCavity. Go team. And no awards Hubris musical would be complete without the unnecessary new song. But at least you have beautiful ghosts. This one's called Beautiful Coast. It was co-written by Taylor Swift and Andrew Lloyd Webber. You can't write a modern lyric for cats. So, like if you can't get tease. Eliot, like get tease. And it, like all of these musical numbers added to the movie to win an award, is completely unnecessary and totally grinds the movie to a halt. More than it already was. I'll dance with these beautiful go. If Francisca Hayward sounds kind of unsure, it's because she doesn't really know the song because they more or less finished it like the day of. We were just rushing. We had written it the day before. I came in and we had the sheet music made up, like an hour or two before they shot it. It's a dreadful day. Terrible. Taylor Swift over here looking at Lady Gaga, Oscar winner, like I want that. One step closer to a got. And her singing it got us a Golden Globe nomination. Whoa. So what, in the end, is the fallout of Cats? Are we going to have a bunch of Cats copycats? Is Cats going to be like the Sharknado of musicals? Well, I doubt it. First of all, Cats is kind of one of a kind. It was a massive, massive loss. And despite the fact that it's probably going to be the new darling of midnight screenings and supplant the likes of Rocky Horror in the Room with its cult following, hey doggy, these are not the tracks that any other studios are going to want to follow in. But I have heard some concern that this might kind of be the end of musical movies. In an Entertainment Weekly article, conflicted theater fan Mark Snittiker wrote, "I fear a similar turmoil that happened in the 80s may occur again, because Cats is, at its core, a musical that confirms for people who hate musicals why they hate musicals. But though we did not ask for it, though we are not responsible for it, though we need not answer for it, I believe theater fans must not abandon Cats. Because as much as we may hate it, we can't deny that we care about it. You care about it. But how would you address a cat? Here is the thing. Some musicals, not all, but most of them require a visual medium that jives with the way that the musical itself is constructed. Les Miserables was constructed for the stage. Cats was constructed for the stage. That is the thing about theater, especially in a show like Hamilton, which basically has no props, let alone a set. It is constructed so that the audience has to imagine what's going on in the story. Overcoming that suspension of disbelief is built into the design of the medium in a way that it is not with film. But your traditional Oscar bait movie does not allow for that. Oscar bait movies demand visual realism, and it's so very rare that something actually gets rewarded for being stylistic. It happens, but the Academy prefers gritty realism right now. That's just how it is. To this idea that there might be a backlash against musical films, that Cats might be the end of Hollywood taking musicals seriously, to that I say good. Good thing riddance, Tom Hooper, and your musical awards bait bullshit. Popular musical being adapted to films because Oscar bait is a disease. The only way movies like this work is either through hyperstylization in the vein of decent films like Moulin Rouge or Chicago, or animation, which likewise can rise visually to the magical unrealism inherent to the medium of musicals. But gritty realism, Oscar bait, no thank. Like, I love Hamilton, but Hamilton the movie. I will kill your friends and family. Please no. Yes, I will gladly take your live recording that you filmed 5 years ago and want released till next year. I will take it. But the Oscar bait musical, the adaptation for adaptation's sake, let it burn. Musical theater right now is kind of in a new golden age. It is doing just fine, and it does not need legitimacy from Hollywood. We do not need film adaptations of musicals just because it's brand name recognition, just because Chicago won a bunch of Oscars. So if Cats marks a demarcation where musicals aren't to being adapted for the screen anymore, good. I don't want Hades Down the movie. Super do not want Hamilton the movie. If you watch any one of these amateur animatics on YouTube, I promise you they work way better than anything Tom Hooper has ever done. So thank you, Cats. Thank you not only for being the true embodiment of modern horror, a monument to celebrity hubris, but also for ending this nonsense of bad musical adaptations with aggressive 4-year consideration campaigns and Oscar dreams. Whoa, we don't need it. Just save everybody a lot of heartache and money and just film the damn thing. Cats 98 will always be there, but Cats 2019 is a cautionary tale of a completely different sort. Someone is smoking over there. Something we cats would never do. Filling their lungs with thick, dark hair. What a disgusting thing to do. Cats have 9 lives with 8 to spare. Humans have 1, with none to barter. Why do they smoke? Why don't they care? Humans are smart, but cats are smarter. Listen to cats, you men. 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 Cats, you men and women, take care of your lungs. They only human. The American Lung Association. The Christmas Seal people. An accident. An accident. An accident. The humans had an accident. There was a child in the car. A child. A child. A child. Cats have 9 lives, children only 1. Help them live that life. Buckle them into a car seat. No one wants a child to become a memory. Memory all alone in the moonlight.